before the Rays and the Bolts came to be, when the Bucks were in the basement of the league, before USF even had a football team, and before the Jags and Marlins even existed, as the Magic were just getting ready to enter the sports landscape, and as UCF was still finding their footing in theirs, and long before the days of the Vipers and Apollos, whose attempts at spring football were a complete train wreck. There once existed a league that changed the fate of football forever. A phenomenon that would spread across the country like wildfire. And at the center of it all, a team would arise that would take the nation by storm. Now, I've done quite a number of football videos on this channel, and while other leagues like college football, the XFL, and AAF have had some minor changes compared to the NFL, none was as drastic as when the Arena Football League debuted in 1987. Technically, the first instance of indoor football came in 1932 with an NFL playoff game played on a hockey rink, but the main idea wouldn't emerge until 50 years later. As the brainchild of Jim Foster, it was designed to be a more compact, higher-energy form of football. He had gotten inspiration from watching indoor soccer matches, where he began to sketch concepts of the new league on an envelope. After his stint with the USFL ended with that league imploding, it seemed the time was right to give arena football a shot. Instead of 100 yards, the field is shrunken to around 30% the size, the same dimensions as a hockey rink, with only 50 yards of playing field. There's no out of bounds, as a wall surrounds the entire field. Instead of 11 players per team, there's only 8, and substitutions were limited, as players subbed out would have to wait a certain time before being allowed to return. Scoring was pretty much the same, save for the addition of a dropkick field goal worth 4 points. And kicks are much less automatic now, as the posts are only 9 feet apart. And if a kick is missed, it can bounce off the net and be returned as a live ball. And unlike the NFL, the AFL had actually fair overtime rules, even back in the 80s. The biggest difference, though, is that it would be a single platoon game, where the players would play both offense and defense. With the rules in place, the first ever arena football game was played on April 27, 1986, as a test match was held in Illinois with volunteer players. It was such a success that a second game was held sometime later, which did even better. It was all the feedback he needed to convince him to launch the Arena Football League in 1987. With 4 teams ready to take the field. Under the leadership of the legendary Darrell Davis, the Washington Commandos, Denver Dynamite, Chicago Bruisers, and Pittsburgh Gladiators were created to kick off the inaugural season. Wait, this isn't right. I thought this was a history of the Tampa Bay Storm video. Where's the Storm? Well, I guess for the time being, I present to you the history of the Pittsburgh Gladiators. As one of the original 4 teams, the Gladiators got to enjoy the highs of the new league, as they took part in its first game against Washington. On the very first play in AFL history, Mike Hohensee would hit Russell Hairston for an immediate score. It would be a testament to what this team and this league would become, as Pittsburgh would hold on to win a close contest with a final of 48-46. They would run it out to a 4-2 record, mainly thanks to Hairston balling out, putting up 1,126 yards and 18 touchdowns in 6 games. He would pretty easily win the league MVP, and Craig Walls would also earn recognition. It would ultimately culminate in the first ever Arena Bowl, where the Gladiators would host the Denver Dynamite. And yeah, it wasn't even close. Pittsburgh got absolutely crushed. They wouldn't even get on the board until the 4th, but they can at least say they got there, which doesn't mean a lot when there's only 4 teams, but whatever. No matter, as by all accounts the Gladiators and the greater AFL was a success, as they averaged around 13,000 fans per game. Interest was surely there for the league to grow, as yeah, it wasn't anything mind-blowing, but at least it allowed them to play more than one season. Sure enough, the AFL was back in 1988, and despite the Dynamite and Commandos having to take a year off, 4 new teams would fill in. The Detroit Drive, Los Angeles Cobras, New England Steamrollers, and the New York Knights. And the schedule was expanded from 6 to 12 games. Things would start strong, with Pittsburgh winning 4 of their first 5, but they would quickly spiral as a 3-game losing streak had them finish the year at 6-6. To make matters worse, Hairston, the reigning MVP, was traded to New England. They were still able to make the playoffs, but they would be easily handled by Detroit, who would go on to win it all. In many ways, 1988 was a disappointing follow-up for the team and the league, as attendance dropped and excitement seemed to dwindle. Following the season, disputes between Foster and team owners would lead to the Cobras, Steamrollers, and Knights all folding. At least the Commandos and Dynamite returned, but the league was still in trouble as they prepared for 1989. However, in an interesting move, Foster opted to have the teams travel to try and showcase themselves for potential investors. They would play all over the country, from Baltimore to Sacramento, where, funnily enough, the most iconic moment of the early AFL took place, as receiver Reggie Smith was slammed against the wall by a Pittsburgh defender. Chicago quarterback Ben Bennett would take offense and rush to Reggie's defense. The benches would clear, with lots of unsportsmanlike activity involved. Foster would try to resolve order himself by entering the field and trying to communicate with the ref and Pittsburgh coach Jim Haring, hoping to get things going again. Well, that attempt was quickly shot down, as Foster was punched in the head 3 times by none other than Jim Haring. I guess openly beating up on the league commissioner in front of 7,000 fans is one way to garner attention. Predictably, he would be suspended and would never return. Yeah, great decision there, bruh. Nonetheless, Pittsburgh would still finish 3-1, along with everyone else. Except the Commandos. Damn, they really did get bullied by everybody. Willie Totten would be the new quarterback, and despite only making 48.7% of his passes, he was still named to the first all-team, somehow. His main guy would be Alvin Williams, and in the playoffs they looked to remedy their past failures. They would face Denver once again, and this time they would actually respond after going down early, as they would put up 20 in the second en route to their first ever playoff win. However, they would run into Detroit in the Arena Bowl, and once again they came out swinging and fell into a deficit early.
Equal Fricky here. The boot by Bojovic is good!
As they entered the second half down 26-12, they tried to get closer with a fumble return score, but Detroit wouldn't budge as they would respond in kind, and the defense did the rest. With that, it seemed to be the beginning of the end for Pittsburgh, as people just weren't really caring anymore. Despite the addition of 2 new teams, the writing seemed to be on the wall for the Gladiators that their time was coming. They had only played 1 game in Pittsburgh in the last 2 years, and could only muster 5,000 fans per game in 1990. At least they had a new owner in Bob Grease, who in turn saw the state of the team and was preparing a move. Despite the work of Iron Man of the Year Thomas Monroe, the 1990 Gladiators sputtered about, finishing 3-5 and got killed by Detroit again in the playoffs. And that was that. In November, it was announced that the team was packing their bags and heading south. After just 4 years, the Pittsburgh Gladiators were dead. And so, as the winds blew towards the ocean, the tide began to change in the AFL. What was once a distant rumbling had begun to take shape, and it was now fixed on Florida. A contest was held to name the new team, and residents from the area submitted all sorts of entries. But it was Ken Meyer from Largo who bestowed the new identity that this team would take for the next 26 years. The might of nature's wrath would descend upon the Florida Suncoast Dome, as in 1991, the Tampa Bay Storm were born.
The clouds prepare for battle in the dark and brooding silence.
With their new quarterback in Jay Gruden, linebacker Lynn Bradford, and receiver Stevie Thomas, the Storm were set to begin their second life. The people of Tampa Bay were treated to all the sights and spectacles of arena football, and what a sight it was.
Somebody throws it over the middle, finds a man, touchdown, Tampa Bay! From its own 23, going deep again, Howard gets it this time, no penalty flag down, so Tampa Bay has yet another answer. First down and a touchdown to Zito! Ferguson, great protection, over the middle, finds his man, Howard, touchdown, Tampa Bay! Going deep, he's got Thomas, touchdown, Tampa Bay!
Enthusiasm in the Bay Area was palpable. People showed up as their first game saw a backlog at the ticket windows, and a match against Denver saw 24,000 fans fill the stands.
So that's the end of the ball game, and the Tampa Bay Storm has rolled one up, its first victory in arena football. 2nd and 3. Ferguson complete. Touchdown, Tampa Bay, and guess who? The 11. He scored! And it's intercepted by Crawford. Tampa Bay wins.
After losing on opening day, they would win their first game in Tampa on June 8th in a crushing 53-12 victory over Columbus. 2 weeks later, they notched their first win in the Dome, as they were in the midst of a 6-game winning streak. They would go 4-1 at home and 8-2 overall, second only behind Detroit, with the season culminating in a 62-19 ass-whooping against New Orleans, in front of over 21,000 ecstatic fans.
Morris on 2nd and 4. Deflected at the loose ball, and it's intercepted by Tampa Bay's Guidry. The pitch once again, it's Bradford. He's got it in there for the touchdown. Touchdown, Tampa Bay.
Nonetheless, they would enter the playoffs with a vengeance, as they faced Denver once again. And this time, it wasn't even a contest, as the Storm would run all over the poor Dynamite, cruising to a 40-13 win. In Pittsburgh, they repeatedly ran into the buzzsaw that was the Detroit Drive, facing them 3 times in the playoffs and losing all 3. But this is different. This is a new team, and as they got set for Arena Bowl 5, they looked to show the league that they meant business.
Once the clouds are parted, light streams down in bright unbroken leaves.
They came out strong, as Gruden would lead his team down the field quickly and score first. But Detroit was able to respond with 2 touchdowns from quarterback Art Schlichter. Of course, the Drive, winners of 3 straight Arena Bowls and led by perhaps the greatest coach in AFL history in Tim Markham, would not be an easy challenge. But unlike the past, the Storm wouldn't falter, as they would explode in the second, with Thomas catching 2 touchdowns, and Bradford was also able to get one as they put up 21 points in the second quarter to go up 28-21 at the half. However, it wasn't over yet, as Detroit would push back to get within 1, but once again the Storm would respond in a big way, with Darren Willis getting open and running 37 yards for the score. He would get another one not long after, as the Storm held a 12-point lead going into the fourth. But despite the defense's best efforts, Detroit would answer back once again, with 2 touchdowns to tie the game. With time running out, Stevie Thomas would once again rise up and haul in a 35-yard pass to put the nail in the coffin. In just 1 year, the Storm showed the arena football world who they really were, and stopped Detroit's dynasty right in their tracks with their first Arena Bowl win in franchise history. Quite a way to welcome their new crowd down south. And for the Storm and the greater AFL, their rise was only just beginning. In '92, the league continued to expand. Like, damn, just 3 years ago there were only 5 teams, and now there's 12? Also, gotta love these names. The Charlotte Rage, Sacramento Attack, San Antonio Force. These are the most 90s ass team names I've ever heard. '92 would be the first year where divisions were introduced, as Tampa Bay was lumped into the South with Charlotte, New Orleans, and Orlando. Now, up until this point, neither Tampa or Orlando had any shared teams in the same league. Tampa Bay had the Bucks and Lightning, and Orlando had the Magic and UCF, but there was no overlap. But in 1991, that would change, as right as the Gladiators moved down to Tampa, the Orlando Predators were granted an expansion team. And so, for the first time, long before USF and UCF would duke it out, the original War on I-4 was ignited. Ever since, both teams would play each other twice a year, and right off the bat it was a back and forth contest, with the teams splitting their games in '91. In '92, they would kick off the season against each other, where they would jostle back and forth as they remained tied heading into the fourth, where the Storm would pull away to secure the win on the road. A few weeks later, they would meet again, and it was close, with Orlando holding a thin lead. But this time, the Predators would shut the door and win their match on the road. Both the Storm and the Predators would be among the top of the league in '92, both finishing 9-1, their only losses coming against each other. While the Storm still had Gruden and Thomas, with the former winning the league MVP, Orlando would have their fair share of stars, with wide receiver Barry Wagner winning Ironman of the Year, and Durwood Rockmore and Jorge Cimadavilla also making the All-Arena team. It was all pointing to a battle in the playoffs, and as Orlando easily dispatched Cleveland, the Storm would withstand Cincinnati's big outburst in the second to win a tight contest. So, sure enough, in the 1992 Arena Football League semifinals, the Tampa Bay Storm and Orlando Predators would meet in the playoffs for the first time. And rather uncharacteristically, it would remain a low-scoring contest, with both teams only combining for 12 points in the first half. It was a tough battle as injuries were starting to mount, but in the fourth, the Storm were able to erase the deficit to force overtime. But after all that work, Orlando would be the ones to get the last laugh, as the Storm were stopped, and Cimadavilla's kick would sail through the uprights to seal the win. A bitter taste for sure, especially as Orlando would go on to win their first title shortly after, but this only served to add more fuel to the fire, as their matchups in '93 would be even fiercer. Still, Orlando held the edge, as they would win both their matchups this year. It didn't mean the games weren't entertaining, far from it, as their Week 6 contest would be another back-and-forth affair that saw 28,000 people pack the Suncoast Dome. Both teams would match each other's scores, but missed extra points and failed two-pointers had the Storm down by 1 late, where Orlando would eat the clock and seal the win. It's their 4th loss in a row to the Predators, as they would once again win the conference at 10-2. In their first 3 seasons, despite only losing 6 games, 4 of them were against Orlando, as it seemed they had met their match against their rivals across the interstate. But they were still able to handle almost everyone else, as their only other loss in '93 came against Charlotte. Now they even had an exhibition game in Germany against Detroit, which saw them win in front of a sellout crowd. At 9-3, they entered the playoffs as the number 3 seed, and would quickly jump out against Albany and not look back. And so, once again, they would face the Orlando Predators in the semifinals, and things looked to be heading to a similar outcome, as the Preds would get out early again. That was until the Storm would roar back in the second, putting up 28 to go up 31-23 at the half. They held that lead into the fourth, where a last-minute comeback was halted, as finally Tampa would get their revenge and defeat the Predators to advance to their 4th Arena Bowl. Now, I love parody as much as the next guy, but for fuck's sake was this Arena Bowl underwhelming. You're not gonna believe it, it's the Storm and the Drive again! This is Detroit's 6th Arena Bowl appearance in a row. Wowee! But just like in '91, they would have trouble against the Storm, as they would put up 10 in the first and 20 in the second thanks to a fumble recovery score, and Gruden continuing to ball out. Shit, it was so easy that Tampa had their backup come in and get a score of his own. In convincing fashion, the Storm ended the Drive's dynasty once and for all, with their 2nd Arena Bowl win in 3 years. With that, they looked to assert themselves as the new team to beat in the AFL. But as they kicked off the '94 season in the newly dubbed Thunderdome, they suddenly found that having sustained success was quite difficult. Back-to-back losses to start the season was a rough start, and despite rattling off 3 wins in a row, they would once again be thumped by Orlando. Nonetheless, they were still able to play well enough, winning 3 more to get to 6-3 before dropping their next 2. They ended the season by snatching a win from the jaws of defeat against the Preds, and were able to secure the 5th seed in the playoffs. But it still wasn't enough, as despite putting up a valiant effort, they would be defeated by the Massachusetts Marauders in the first round. Yeah, 94 was definitely a disappointment. I mean, they went from champions to barely scraping by. They allowed more points than they scored on average, and they struggled at things they used to handle pretty easily. Sure, Gruden, Thomas, and Travis Pearson were still able to produce good numbers, but this was the first time the Storm severely underperformed expectations. Something had to change, and that would come in Grease selling the team to Peter Kern. In turn, he would hire a man that the Storm were already plenty familiar with. Tim Markham, former coach of the Drive, and a man who's already got 4 championships under his belt, was brought on to right the ship. The 1995 Storm had a reputation to preserve. They had spent their first 3 years in Tampa Bay building themselves as a force to be reckoned with. But they had to show that 94 was just a fluke and not the beginning of the end for this club. And so they got to work in the newly formed Southern Division, or basically the Florida Division, as they were paired with Orlando and the Miami Hooters. Yes, named after the restaurant. Yeah, spoiler alert, the Hooters sucked. Throughout their whole history, they were constantly bullied by Tampa and Orlando. 95 would be their worst season, as they finished 1-11. The Storm would kill them 54-7, and the Preds would do the same 51-13. Even after a rebrand, they were never able to make the playoffs after 93, and would ultimately fold after 2001. Incredible. And don't worry, this is not the last time we'll see a third party in the AFL Florida War. But regardless, the Storm would win 4 straight to start the season, but they would soon face struggles as they lost their next 2 against Albany and Vegas. But they would rebound and win out to end the season, including winning both games against Orlando. And yeah, they weren't even close. Week 12 saw them whoop the Preds 44-20 in front of 24,000 fans at the Thunderdome. These guys meant business. Gruden would once again play well, with 2,787 yards, and Thomas would record over 1,000 of his own. George LaFrance was another key piece, and Cedric McKinnon would lead the team on the ground with 222 rushing yards. But the key to their turnaround was their defense, which massively improved after 94. Kent Wells, Sylvester Bembry, and Corey Dowden would all make the first or second All-Arena teams, and Tracy Perkins would make 5 picks, as they posted one of the best defenses in the league. And yeah, most of these guys don't have any pictures. In case it wasn't obvious, that's what happens when you make a documentary about an obscure team in an even more obscure league. It was enough to earn them the number 1 seed, and their winning ways continued as they handled the Memphis Pharaohs in the first round. Seriously, Memphis Pharaohs? What about Memphis screams Egyptian culture? Like, who picked this name? In the semis, they faced Albany once again, who were coached by a familiar face. They were able to give them a run for their money as they held a 1-point lead with mere seconds left. But as Thomas would field the ball off the net in the end zone, and facing the entire length of the field and the opposition, he would break 5 tackles and run all the way back to put the Storm in front, 56-49.
Touchdown!
They would hold on for the win and return to the Arena Bowl for the third time in Tampa and face an old friend. Somehow, the Orlando Predators, despite finishing 7-5, would go on a tear in the postseason, defeating San Jose and Iowa to reach their third Arena Bowl in 4 years. It was thanks in large part to League MVP Barry Wagner, and now they looked to face the Storm on the biggest stage. And let me tell you, these teams hate each other. As if the fact that Tampa won both regular season matchups wasn't enough, they went so far as to dig up dirt that Orlando linebacker Webby Burnett had signed a contract in the CFL, making him ineligible in the championship game. Never have I seen a team go this far to try and gain a competitive advantage, and it was all pointing to the biggest game for both these teams. And of course, there's no video of this game, so I guess we'll have to resort to the diagram. That's what happens when you're covering such a random underground league, I suppose. Both teams would trade scores in the first, with LaFrance coming up with a kickoff return to tie the game at 15. He would burst out with 2 more in the second, as the Storm were able to get to a 29-15 lead at the half. Orlando was able to push back with a quick score to make it a 1-score lead, but not even 2 minutes later, Tampa would answer back with a pass to Thomas to make it 35-22. In the fourth, Orlando made another attempt to come back with a touchdown run, but Tampa would once again respond to keep the lead out of reach. And with time running down, Tracy Sanders would be the one to call game with a pick six. In their biggest contest yet, the Storm thoroughly proved themselves and trounced their rivals to once again reach the top.
What a crowd! This is unbelievable atmosphere for arena football or any kind of football, and it's a great.
3 titles in 5 years made them a prime contender for the next AFL dynasty, but little did we know that their magnum opus was only yet to come, as in '96 they would reach the peak of their fearsome power. The winds had reached terrifying speeds. Rain was pummeling the ground, blowing sideways as it ravaged the landscape. There was nothing the AFL could do to hide from the Storm. The '96 team would go on to post their best season in franchise history, as most opponents didn't really stand a chance. 57 against St. Louis, 62 against Texas, 69 against Arizona, as Gruden somehow improved from the previous year with 3,626 yards, as the team put up almost 700 points against their opposition. The defense allowed the fewest points in the league, with the team recording 24 sacks. Their only losses came against Orlando, whose streak of 5 wins in a row against them came to an end, who casually snapped the Storm's streak of winning 17 games in a row! Not that it mattered, as they still finished 12-2, but somehow they fell to the second seed due to tiebreakers with Iowa. Well, it didn't really mean anything, as they easily dispatched the Anaheim Piranhas, and were looking to clinch another close game against Arizona, with LaFrance scoring 5 touchdowns on the day. However, the Rattlers were able to march down the field and score with only 11 seconds left. Down by 1, Arizona opted to go for 2 and seal the win, but they ran a pitch play for some baffling reason, and the Storm would easily stop them, ending the game. And if the previous Arena Bowl wasn't exciting enough, the '96 one promised to be even better, as they would face the Iowa Barnstormers to determine the champion. The two best teams in the league in the biggest game. Sounds like a damn good matchup. And as the first quarter went underway, it looked to live up to the hype, as the teams would bounce back and forth. Thanks to this little guy you might have heard of called Kurt Warner, Iowa was able to keep pace with the Storm, as they remained equal at the half. A 30-yard touchdown pass from Warner was answered with a 30-yard touchdown pass from Gruden, as Thomas was still able to make his name known with 2 scores, including a pick six. In the third, Gruden would once again get them in front, and this time the defense was able to hold Iowa to only a field goal. Both would trade touchdowns, but with time winding down, the Storm still held a 4-point lead. With 4 minutes left, Warner would move his team down the field, getting all the way to the 1-yard line. It was time for the defense to stand tall, and they did as they stuffed Iowa on first down, with the ball being spotted 2 yards back, much to the chagrin of the onlooking fans. On second down, the pass was deflected off the receiver's hands, and Perkins would bat another pass away to force 4th and goal. And in the biggest play of the season, Warner's pass would fall to the ground. And for the 4th time in 6 years, the Storm were on top of the league. If there was any question before, there was none now. The Tampa Bay Storm, now with 4 titles under their belt, now matched Detroit for the most in the league. Stevie Thomas would win his 2nd Finals MVP, and the people of Tampa Bay were finally able to enjoy having a winner. I mean, shit, the Bucks were still not doing anything. The Storm were proving to be the premier franchise in Tampa Bay. Even as they shared the stadium with the newly formed Lightning, they were still putting up admirable attendance. And for many looking back now, that '96 Arena Bowl is widely regarded as one of the best games in AFL history, with the electric crowd and exciting action on display being the best possible showcase of arena football for the foreseeable future. The team and the league was at the apex of their prowess. But of course, nothing lasts forever. The next decade of the Storm would challenge them with new foes, old grudges, familiar faces, and lots of bullshit. As it turns out, being at the top makes you a pretty big target. And now the Storm, after building their empire, had to do their best to defend it.